Welcome to a special episode of Kung Fu Conversations. This is a first roundtable discussion that we've done, a meeting of the minds, if you will, of two of what I believe to be the best online presence teachers out there right now in the world of self-defense, as well as the world of classical martial arts training. That is Coach Kevin Secours of the Integrated Fighting System and Sifu Russ Smith of the Burinkan dojo. Gentlemen, welcome today.
Welcome.
Hi, guys.
Thank you.
So if anyone wants to know Coach Kevin's background, as well as Sifu Russ, they are also a first. They're our first reoccurring guests.
Ooh.
So yeah, you guys are a first. So you can listen to my solo cast that I was honored to have with Kevin Secours under our Warriorship Conversing project. And then that's something I might bring up this episode as well. And then Sifu Russ Smith was kind enough to speak to Owen and I about his martial journey as well on a regular episode of Kung Fu Conversations. So one thing that I really wanted to talk about, and anybody can hold up the red or white flag, whether you want to go first or not. A reason I brought you gentlemen back on the show is I believe that you guys are some of the higher educators out there right now in the world of teaching martial arts as well as self-defense, but you also are great practitioners and can show the end result. And I don't necessarily think that always happens a whole lot. I really believe that there is a gap in the world of martial arts because people don't realize that the teaching skill set might be a completely different skill set than the system, style, or method that is being presented. I wondered what you guys thought about that, what you have done to further your education to be a better teacher. Have you broken down curriculum? Have you reorganized things? What are some of the steps? What are some of the processes that you've gone through personally? And and maybe it could be inspiration from coaches, teachers, all these different categories are open. So I wanted to leave that kind of open-ended to you guys and whoever wanted to start on that big monumental task of education and what it takes.
You want to start?
Sure. I will. So I couldn't agree with you more, Randall, because, I think it's very common that anyone who's an expert practitioner in any field of study is very excited to either teach or put up a shingle and try to become a business person in that area of expertise. And it's super common that, I don't know what the numbers are, but, 70% of statistics are made up on the spot. Many people will create a business thinking, I'm great at building shelves, I'm great at doing this. They'll start a business and they'll fail because they fail first to understand that business is a set of overlay skills. And I came to the exact same realization as a beginning instructor many years ago that I was a somewhat intermediate to advanced practitioner, and I decided to start teaching, and I started running up against roadblock after roadblock. And it wasn't until I respected the fact that there was a whole different set of skills out there that I didn't have, that I could start reading about those skills, grab the books that the educators, the people who have good experience and education, like Coach Kevin, go on to study. I did what I could without going to college specifically to become an educator, and tried to work on learning those things myself. So first step is realize you have a problem. Second step is try to get some help. And so over the course of trying to figure out how to become a real teacher, I tried a lot of things. Some went well, some failed. Ultimately, things that have helped are things that I've drawn from my career experience in engineering and consulting, applied to the role of education, but just categorizing things well so that you're clear and complete. Those have been very helpful, like taking curriculum and dividing it into 3 pillars leading up to skill development. You've got theory and strategy, all the stuff you can yum-cha over, right? Let's sit down and chat about it like we are today. You got body development, how to make a warrior's body. You got body coordination, how to make your body move the way the art wants it to move, good biomechanics, good flow, good power, all those things. And then lastly, all those things are building to to bring you to the place where you can do skill development, which is the real goal of what most people are trying to accomplish. So there's a lot more we could talk about, but let me stop there. I'd love to hear Coach Kevin.
Yeah, I agree. I think, realizing that there's a problem is a huge thing. In my case, it was realizing it painfully for a long period of time, because my first instructor was at least terrible for me. I joined after getting attacked. It was the first instructor I encountered. He was wearing the outfit at the mall, and that was it. And it 6 years of it just not fitting. And then I was fortunate enough to meet an exceptional instructor who was more classical in his roots, but somehow more modern and integrated and progressive in his approach. And I was young then, and just being given the permission to integrate, to explore, having a first teacher who told you to never cross-train and who was jealous, and then having a second teacher who encouraged you to cross-train and forced you to cross-train and brought in different elements. Say, we're going to do some Wing Chun, or here's a Tai Chi exercise. That was hugely important. So I think just giving yourself permission to recognize that at least the approach may not be good for you. Sometimes there are great practitioners and great teachers, and they just don't speak to you. That was definitely a huge wake-up for me. And then following that, I was an artist. I was going to art school. And I always knew that teaching was an important endeavor. I could identify good versus bad teachers. So I wanted to be an art teacher because I thought it would be more secure employment than starving artist or unemployed comic artist. And art school was very interesting because everybody was tremendously competent. Some people had absolutely no ability to teach. They were worse than average. Some people had methodical approaches. Some people had amazing discipline in their own personal approach, but didn't extend it to teaching. Others did. So just seeing all the nuances. Every instructor I had in art school taught me something about what to do or what not to do. So I think, realizing you have a problem and taking on the responsibility of wanting to improve is very important.
Do you guys feel that maybe, and, Sifu Russ, you, myself, and Owen might have to, fall on this sword a little bit more often, but do you feel that sometimes the answers are in a Western context as far as the terminology goes? You were talking about biomechanics, body integration, all these other things. Those are things that can be a universal concept that, and it's shown in a good, system style from any country, any method, any context. But do we sometimes focus too much on what are the proper Chinese terms? What is this hand called versus this hand? Do you think some people stay in that area and that mindset a little too much instead of maybe being like, let's not worry about what the hand's called. Let's worry about, how many different ways you can use it? How do we integrate it back into the skill sets? Do you think that that's something that might be a roadblock for more of the traditional artist?
Yeah, this is Russ. Yeah, I completely agree that the jargon can get in the way of learning. And I very specifically have decided, even though I love the aspects of the language and in some Chinese martial arts, the poetry, the real condensed, distilled meanings that are put into the writings, I also find that it's very valuable for me at 40 years or so in, and it's super dangerous for me to impress language or concepts that are wrapped in jargon for the beginning students. They have a ton to learn, especially those who are, one, struggling with the fact that they are not, they don't have a warrior's body, so they're going through all the work to try to develop that, and they don't have an athlete's coordination. So for some people, the first 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years of their martial training is the teacher trying to help that student wire their brain and their body together in the body coordination silo of the art. So I think anything that you do that slows down that progress makes it much more difficult. That said, I find a tremendous value for myself and for my students when they get to a certain state to start introducing more difficult to understand concepts or layered or nuances, those things. What are your thoughts, Coach Kevin?
Yeah, I have a rather specific view on language, just because being raised in Quebec, English speakers are a borderline illegal minority, right? So my dad was French, my mom was English. And my whole life, we just had law after law after law added to limit the use of English, right? So, for example, even in a one-person company, it's illegal now for me to keep my own notes in English. And my French is not particularly good because I was raised in this very adversarial environment. And I remember early days of teaching, if, you'd have French students making fun of your accent, trying to speak French for them. It always struck me because every teacher I had a Chinese or Japanese or Filipino accent. And the last thing in my brain would have been making fun of their accent. I was so eager to be there to learn. So I think early on, I never viewed myself as being good at language because it was kind of something that was imposed. And I was never big on memorizing terms. I always struggled to have that extra layer of division. Not that it's bad. I think there's poetry in it. I think there's, but I tend to think much more like, Kano might have in judo, where it's a left outside sweep or an inside sweep, as opposed to a bashful monkey grabbing peach from the cave of splendor. I tend to be much more direct, and I don't even really care if a student has the term myself. I like to just make it as direct as possible. I think we see in arts like BJJ, where the same technique has like 48 names, it's almost impossible to keep up with them. Yeah. And the top practitioners don't even know all the terms for the exact same thing, so it's becoming almost comical to me, the inverted splendor donkey guard pass or whatever. I'm like, I don't know, man. For me, I don't get into it too much, it's, but I'm very simple that way. Yeah.
That's great.
Coming from more of a, what would I call it? Like a personal protection methodology, if you will.
Yeah.
Coach Kevin. So for, Sifu Russ, myself, and Owen, we use kata and pattern to, not only develop the body, but to hopefully, if it's a good system and a good teacher, they know the tactics that movement practice has in it. And, to build the characteristics of what that system style method is. How do you train coordination through a student with a more open-based system like yourself, like symmetry, body symmetry, awareness, things like that? How would you do something like that without a kata?
So I do still have a small sample of students with me that have been with me for like 25 years that still do all the combinations and all the katas, and they insist on it and they keep it alive. Over the years, I've just continued to whittle things away and teach less and less of it, but there are still some that do it. So we do have a side-by-side comparison. I think when you get into sort of, let's say, a tactical civilian base, they're much more open to learning biomechanical flow, animal-like movement. If you put a tactical edge on it, it's easier to sell. It's ironically the tactical people that sometimes are the most, black and white, sort of dualistic in their thinking. And for example, with police officers, one of the biggest problems we have is very low budget, not a lot of teaching time. So if any of the teaching seems nebulous or sort of meta, they're really not into it. It's got to be, for this much money, what measurable results will you give me? Yet, these are the same people who suffer the most from lack of routine, repetitive stress injury, fitness requirements. And so you got to kind of sell it to them without knowing they're getting it. So I'll teach them some basic biomechanical principles, which would be almost identical to like Shiko or warrior walking in Aikido or traditional Jiu-Jitsu, but maybe applied to arresting a subject. How do we kneel and transition? And then invariably somebody has an injury, so I'll teach that guy a workaround, and somebody else can't kneel, so I'll teach him a different approach. And I modify it to each of them. But what happens is that I get them to take responsibility for this idea that you need to be able to move, right? So I always tell people that if you cannot move gracefully on your own, don't expect a 300-pound aggressor on crack to suddenly make you miraculously smooth. It's gonna take away from that capacity. So we need to take responsibility for movement. We need to do those low squats and move on the ground and have that sort of animal movement. Whether they want to do it with reps, sets in more of a Western approach or some kind of a kata choreography, it doesn't bother me. I have some students that like it one way, so I do it that way. Others like it very soft. I do it that way. Some don't like to repeat the same thing twice. So every student's different. For myself, I'm not much of a set guy. People always ask me what I do for fitness, and it's never the same thing twice. I get bored doing sets of curls. Like I go crazy. I can't do it. Running is the largest affront to my consciousness that I can possibly verbalize. I can't do the same thing for 3 hours. I just throw a sweaty guy on top of me, make me wrestle, I'll have to survive, throw a bag on my head, I'm in, put my car underwater, let's go. But just running, this would be like the antithesis of what would I do, But I have students that love that kind of droning repetition. I like using Makiwara, but I have some students that'll do like 10,000 reps without moving like a monk, which is great. Fantastic. So I try to teach to that, but I can tell you when they're gone, I'm exhausted by that approach. I find it very, I have got severe ADHD and I'm kind of like a chihuahua on Red Bull, I have to go everywhere. So that tends to be how I format my thought. So I don't really have a system when it comes to that. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So it sounds like you tailor a process for the individual's needs. And so how would I say this? Do you have people that teach the integrated fighting system or that have been certified somehow through you that have kind of their own methodology and do it their own way?
Yeah. Like let's say Nico, who's our head in Belgium. He's a very different dynamic lad for me. He's 6'7". He's a big guy. I'm 6'2". He's not tiny, but everybody always asks how tall I am when I pose it next to this guy. He's very experienced in Burinkan, and then he does BJJ, and he's trained his whole life and fantastic. And he's a tactical instructor for the police. His interpretation is very different from how I move, and yet we have consistencies. We believe in, for example, principles of responsible power and respecting use of force. We have common goals and how we'll intervene or arrest. But every time I see him, he's coming up with new material, and then we throw it back and forth, and I learn from him and he learns from me. I think it's very important. I think it's very, I was fortunate to have some teachers that I understood very well, even though they were terrible teachers. And then I always felt like I was going to the well to get the water for other people. Then I would try to teach it in different ways to make sense of what I think they were trying to say. So I always had that reflex of doing that. But for my students, as my downloads attest, I try to give them 50 approaches. I try to give them every possible piece of information I can think of. And I'm in a huge part motivated by not necessarily legacy, but it's not about keeping my name out there, but it's about keeping the knowledge out there. Because I was fortunate enough to learn from great people. And I always think if I die today and I don't make the download, then that information doesn't go out there. And invariably, every time something gets published, somebody comes back to me saying, I've been doing this 30 years. I've never seen it that particular way. That's very important for me, that knowledge doesn't get lost, because we have, whole combat lineages that have disappeared, Native American lineages there's no written record, Irish fighting systems that are all but extinct. God knows the Boxer Rebellion extinguished how many hundreds and thousands of Kung Fu masters that we'll never know about their greatness. So I think it's important. We have this digital technology at our disposal. I can communicate with people around the world and get feedback from them in real time. Yeah, we never would have met probably 40 years ago, right? Without internet. It's crazy how we can make friends across the planet. So this motivates me. This gives me a lot of energy to get the information out and to get feedback from people. I find it's a good way to improve.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Outstanding. Sifu Russ, you are a cross trainer also, but in the classical method. Let's see if I miss any, and you're going to have to say the Kobudo method, because I always butcher. It's not Mari. Is it Mariyoshi? Mariyoshi. Okay. So you do Mariyoshi Kobudo. You are a Goju-Ryu practitioner. You do Wuzuquan with the Five Ancestors fist of Southern Chinese Kung Fu, which is 5 systems in and of itself. Let's see. We've got Taizuquan. I'm going to forget the last one. You'll have to help me out here. Taizuquan, Lohan, Southern White Crane, Southern Monkey, and then what's the last one that's in
Damo, Dazun, Loaded Armor.
Which is kind of the internal engine, if you will, of the system. You practice Pak Mei. You've done some Dragon Sign, Southern Dragon.
Dragon as well, yeah.
You
integrated Eskrima from Mark Wiley.
Yes, integrated screen with remarkable. And the one that I think is pretty sweet is you've done a little bit of German fencing. Was it
German longsword? Yeah,
German longsword.
Very helpful. It really
interesting.
Yeah, it really helped me understand timing in a way that the jargon of Japanese martial arts didn't. So understanding the master strokes and why they're the master strokes, because they defend in the during and counter in the during, right? So understanding them in a very simple language really helped me think about after, during, and before, and how you can utilize the best techniques to command timing and get inside the other person's OODA loop. So that was very, very helpful in my learning journey for sure. So I think back on all those things that you just mentioned, I trained, including some other things that I didn't train enough to say that I'm instructor level at. I usually don't talk about, but everything has developed little light bulbs along the way, and they're all just little, I learned about this principle or this way of practicing or this way of applying a particular technique. So yeah, every one of those arts has been helpful in a different way. And in some of those cases, I feel indebted to help maintain those systems and carry them on. And for me, and I don't recall if we talked about this before, Randel, was just the way that I made sense of the challenge of having, like Coach Kevin talked about, the bad teachers and, systems that didn't really speak to me for many reasons. The thing that helped me figure out how to find my own way. And by the way, Coach Kevin, I love that you said permission and taking responsibility. To me, those are huge keys. There were big light bulbs for me, and they've continued to be big light bulbs for the people in traditional arts that I try to help become better teachers. But the idea that you can separate, that a martial tradition, you can look at the tradition as the payload or the content or the specific skill sets, maneuvers, ways of moving, and the training methods. And you can take the teaching methods and throw those things right out the fucking window if you need to, and come up with brand new teaching methods and training methods that get you to the same ultimate goals that the system speaks to. So for me, that was so important at coming to terms with taking responsibility for and giving myself the permission to become the teacher that I needed to and felt like I needed to become, right? Like a lot of us, I want to be the teacher I wish I had. I want to be the teacher who gives my student those things that it took me 30 years to learn. I want to give it to them in 5 if I can. And so those are my goals. So, I am somewhat constrained by systems, but I've found that it's not that hard to teach better. And better may not reach everybody. Better may not solve every problem, but better can be incremental progress. And I'm a huge fan of that. And I'm in various stages of that. I teach about 5 of these systems that we talked about. And some of them I teach very much like I used to, and I don't make much change, but I just toss in a few skill development drills to make the system a little more alive, knowing that most of what we do is actually really too dangerous to mess around with. Talking about weapons, like ancient weapon systems, is very, very dangerous to spar with these things. And, we all have the continuum of the problem of most of us have to go to work tomorrow. You go to explain my job badly. Well, I type for a living, right? So I need my fingers to work. So please don't break my fingers today while we're training. These are all challenges, right? So everything that I teach as a tradition, we move as quickly as the student can and is interested in moving towards progressive reality. For the individual and in the system, that path looks different.
One of the best things, and I don't know if you remember this, I've heard you say this on multiple shows. And if you could just take a minute, because I know what your background is as far as your profession goes. And I'm going to misquote you, but here we go. And this is for you, Sifu Russ. I believe you said something like, hey, I love the classical hardware. I'm just updating the software on how these systems are thinking, moving, and presented in that modern context. Would you kind of, you kind of already said that, but would you just bounce off of that just a hair?
My career has generally been in software engineering. So I think a bit like an engineer. I didn't come at education directly. It's been later in life study for me. So, the engineering approach has given me some analogies that work, right? So, engineering had made me a systems thinker, right? It helped me be good at, or become better at discerning first principles, solving problems at the source rather than at the symptom. It's helped me understand why precise language is so critical, and that wraps back to our discussion about jargon. So there's a lot about software engineering that to me helps fit well, including things like project management helps to teach you the value of good backwards planning, good measurement approaches, and then only then changing kind of your teaching methodology last. Putting forth test first methodology, where you attempt to get the student to try the skill and only then teach the things they were missing or got wrong. So there are a lot of those things that are analogous to other great learning frameworks that have been developed over the decades that somewhat mimic project management, engineering, and consulting activities.
What was the book that you keep mentioning that everyone should go out and get?
I'm sure this
Besides your own.
Oh, yeah. I know what you mean. The book is called Understanding by Design. I think it's like a first-year teacher's manual. But it was fantastic because it reminded me that backwards planning is valuable, because I learned about it from my buddies in the military. I learned it from software development, but they also really expressed why it's helpful to have even a practitioner, not a teacher, understand what's going on in the system, what the goals are, so that they can play, learn, extemporize, and kind of problem solve their own training. And so for me, as a teacher who wants them to succeed and surpass me as quickly as possible, what brings me the greatest joy is when we're on the floor and somebody fails at a drill or a skill, and I can say, well, what were you missing? And they look over on the board and they're like, principle 5, I didn't use strong versus weak, or I didn't use second gate when I could have. Like, to me, that is just the penultimate reward as a teacher, is to see a student self-correct.
Oh, yeah. That is awesome. That is awesome. One of my favorite parts about talking to you, Coach, was on the teaching side, was talking about, because I heard the P word. Sifu Russ just said it. You were talking about how the mother tiger lines up her cubs and their little geese and teaches them their Fujao Pai kata. Would you talk about the diabolical words? The diabolical word known as play, and what comes out of having play versus inside of a context, or play with inside of restraint, or play with inside of a topic or a goal, versus screwing around, which is not the same thing.
Yeah. I think, first of all, integrating play is a really good way to bridge the sort of Western-Eastern gap. Because if you look at most Western thinking, it's very dualistic. It's either or, extrinsic, intrinsic. But if you look at traditional Asian martial arts, there are so many concepts that we struggle to translate into Western thinking, right? And we can do our best, but like Sifu Russ is a very analytical, engineering-minded person. He has a personal relationship with the more nebulous qualities of the Asian martial arts, but that's happening at a very complex level, right? And to communicate that to a student can be tough. Play, imagine something like chi as a concept. How long could you spend explaining this to somebody? Teaching them, it's a lifetime, and you're never really going to fully encapture it, because at a certain point, the label is just a rough approximation of a huge idea. Play gets you into like Csikszentmihalyi said about flow. It's a state that transcends labels. It transcends descriptive ability, and we do it naturally. All animals do it. Kids do it. We explore. We learn through play. And then it's really only the Industrial Revolution that made schools into factories where we sit in big groups and we have to, learn by rote memorization. Most tribal cultures do not teach this way. It's much more apprenticeship-based, learning from dad, learning with the group, modeling behavior, but always in a relationship to the environment. So this is why I move so heavily towards constraint-led education, because you have that notion that you have the individual performer, the task they're performing, and the environment that they're in. And they can't be separated. right? One of the videos I'm working on now, I use Mike Malpass's analogy. Walking on a beam that's 6 inches above the ground, it's a very simple task. Walking on that same beam 60 feet above the ground, very different. The only thing that changed was the environment. But the stress load, the perception, the cognitive processing, it all changes. So there's so much talk, particularly in tactics and self-defense, about reality-based. But a lot of these reality-based systems are still nevertheless only performing their drills in a padded dojo, in the same square room, in the same conditions. Put people, we just came back from the Netherlands, we were teaching there, put guys in a car, throw them in a small jail cell, have them fight in a staircase. At any speed of training, you are learning so much more from that play. You're learning about adaptability. You're making your own decisions. You're developing your assertiveness. You're discarding excess. You're learning not to be fancy. You're just getting it done. All of that comes from play. There's research showing that play leads to less injury levels. I know firsthand that it creates much more motivation to train. I would get bored by repetition. My students always come back. I remember watching, I think it was an interview with Jesse Glover, one of Bruce Lee's early students. And he said, man, I just kept coming back because every day was different. He never taught the same thing the same way, and that's a huge sort of advantage of play. So play isn't just goofing around. It has to have a goal. But you could take any task. You could take any traditional exercise and just modify a restraint on the practitioner. Have them close one eye. Deprive them of their good hand. Sifu Russ would, I'm sure, appreciate this. If you're doing traditional staff, spear, whatever, two-handed work, and then deprive yourself of one hand, the work becomes completely different, right? Deprive yourself of one eye or the other eye. We each have a dominant eye. That changes. Play with your breath, and that's just on the performer. Change the environment. I remember one of my early Tai Chi teachers, as soon as you had the long form down pretty well, she would make you perform it in a closet. And then you just kept turning into a wall. So how do you make the form work in a closet? She says, what, if you were arrested or you were locked up or you had no space, would you stop training? And then her ultimate goal was that even if you had no physical space, you can always perform it here, right? And this is what she was trying to get us to understand. So that's an environmental constraint. A task constraint can be an objective. You can give them a very simple goal on the task. It could be hitting a target, of course, but it could be not doing something or not going to the ground or not moving in a certain way or, stepping on the opposing color deprives the enemy of a weapon. Whatever it is you want to do, right? You literally just find your own way. And one thing that Sifu Russ mentioned was, doing the traditional work, it's too dangerous sometimes to just not have structure. One of the things that I think is hugely misunderstood in constraint-led education, not misunderstood, but variously interpreted, is you have a lot of instructors now saying, I don't teach technique, not ever. And that's great as a concept. It seems like the philosophy at the highest end. But if I'm teaching you firearms tomorrow and I don't give you basic safety protocols and just let you figure it out, you're gonna reduce your student population real quick, right? So there's the more dangerous the learning. If we're dealing with neck breaks, if we're dealing with sword work, obviously that in itself is a constraint. The mortality, the risk of injury is a constraint. I got my dog barking. So that's got to always be brought into perspective. So it's not the complete absence of structure. And many purists believe that technique is terrible. I get people chiding me because I'll still use Hubud, from Cali, or I'll teach a flow set because and I said, you know what? I agree with Inosanto when he says, learn the drill to forget the drill. But you learn the drill and then you forget it the way you want to. I'm not going to forget it for you. It's kind of like me climbing a ladder, getting on the roof, kicking the ladder down, and then inviting you up. And when you ask, how'd you get there? Go, don't worry about it. Just get up. Right? Like, even Bruce Lee still taught traditional elements because he recognized these were the elements that I use the most. So I think you can always balance it. My belief is that if you, like Sifu Russ said, you can teach the worst thing better. So even if I get brought in, for example, and they say, do you know this method of handcuffing? And I completely disagree with it. If that's what they're hiring me to teach, I'm going to teach that better than anyone else has taught it. And that's the challenge for me. And sometimes I'll go, especially in poorer countries and I'll encounter military that have been trained so terribly, but they're supremely confident in what they're doing. So I have the option. If I'm there for a day, do I want to just shatter their illusions, leave them disillusioned, not able to do what I've just taught, but no longer confident in what they once believed in? Or is the confidence perhaps at least better for deployment purposes? You know, is it better to have faith in your unicorn horn than to not know how to use the gun on your waist? Right? And this is always the dilemma. So I try to always go with whatever the student or the class wants, but I try to teach it as well as I can, even if it's completely contrary to how I would normally do it. And I think it's important to always task yourself with teaching the worst possible thing better, because we don't know. I mean, we're always going to be encountering circumstances in reality. Right now, we're having this conversation. God knows 10 years from now, will it be legal? You know, will we have to go underground? Who knows what would happen, right? Like, there were periods in the histories of the martial arts where many things were illegal and we were required to hide knowledge and entire lineages were eradicated. Right now we have open discussion, and it's not everywhere in the world that has that. So we're very fortunate. So I think we should all challenge ourselves to try to find new perspectives. And rather than, you know, there's very popular sport on the internet of just making fun of other arts, you know, and people, the MMA guys have to trash Aikido and they have to do whatever. Again, if you're so secure in what you believe, why do you need to do this? Why? And then they argue they're socially policing so other people don't get trapped into believing that. And there's so much anger behind it. I often wonder, how long did they feel they were duped by something? You know, what is it that makes them so angry about that? Because if you have confidence in what you're doing, listen, I've met guys that, you know, I had a Chen Tai Chi master, Lee Mancharn, who was like the height of my nipple and no physical fitness to bear. This guy still is the hardest hitting human being I've ever encountered in my life. And you would never expect it looking at him. His method did not work for me. I could not do what he asked and then produce the results he produced. But it sure as hell worked for him, right? So for me to mock it or dismiss it, again, what doors am I shutting to myself? And maybe I'm just not ready for it yet. Maybe I will be in my lifetime. I don't know, right? So I think play is not a bad word. It can be done with tremendous structure. It can be done with very specific goals. The simplest model I found is in the constraint-led approach, where you have the performer, the task at hand, and the environment, and you choose one of those things and you tweak little elements. You can teach the exact same jab, the exact same technique 1,000 different ways just by playing with those three criteria. And it's safer. It's more entertaining for the students. It leads to me, the main goal is adaptability. I want to be able to adapt to circumstance. And how am I going to train myself to adapt if I don't adapt in my training? So I want to require myself to adapt constantly, to never be comfortable in what I'm doing. I have the fortune of teaching around the world, so I can teach the exact same material. I can even follow the same constraints. It will never be experienced the same way. Cultures interpret them differently. Individuals interpret them differently. Fatigue, jet lag, dietary disease, whatever it is you have going on, these will all affect you. So you're never stepping into that same river twice. And I think a lot of the traditional teachers I had, they were not progressive like, Sifu Russ is discussing. And they were teaching the same way because that's the way it had been taught. And I don't even think it was appealing to them. And that boredom carries over, and it doesn't prepare you, in my opinion.
Well said. Goodness gracious. There's so much there. Something that it was cool. I can't remember where Sifu Russ said it, but I think I remember where Coach Kevin mentioned it with your 6'7" gentleman over. Was it in Holland?
Belgium.
Belgium.
Yeah, Nico is on many of my videos. He's a giant.
Awesome. Something that I think that's missed, and it's something that I work on quite a bit. And I actually got this idea from that guy over there with the glasses on, was dialing in proper pressure for the right partner. I think that is something that is far overlooked, and I've really tried to take this and run with it. How I first introduce, I'll give you guys a little bit on this, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about pressure testing. It took me 27 years of Wing Chun to realize that the perfect Pak Sao to introduce to a beginning class is the Tony Robbins high five. Mm-hmm. Go around, give everybody a high five at the beginning of class. Just everyone knows how to do a high five. They don't hurt their hands. It's the right amount of pressure. It goes from the hand through the structure down to the feet, and everyone can do it. And then I could point back to be like, okay, this drill that we're going to do, that high five is the perfect pressure for your Pak Sao. It took me 1 billion years to figure
Randel,
that out.
I'll only join these two threads of conversation because as someone who has high five Tony Robbins, he's a big son of a bitch, and that's a heavy hand.
Okay. Well, maybe I have to dial it up a little bit then. But if my rookie student, if they come into my class the first day and I Pak Sao them, I can throw a Pak Sao that will jar people's bones. Mm-hmm. If I do that on the first day to a student that's just coming to me, that might shock them into, I'm not ready for this. Yeah. This is too much for me. This is too intense. And so for me, I don't, when I was learning Pak Mei back in the day, I don't know if I ever told you that I did some Pak Mei Sifu Russ, but I really enjoyed it. But my teacher talked a lot about in terms of 0 to 100%. Okay. We have the sliding scale 0 to 100%. You're fully off, you're fully on. And I'm like, okay. And then in Wing Chun, when I was first introduced to it, it was like, okay, you're trying to always use 50%, then you go back from there. So I had these scales in my head of 0, 50, and 100%. And then when I first started training with Owen, he threw an idea in my head, and I'm like, I'll never forget it. He's like, okay, well, what's 42% of something in your body? And of course, these are concepts. It's nothing but a concept, but I'd never thought of that. I'm like, wait, what? He's like, well, can you do 17% of your power? I'm like, well, what is that? He's like, well, play with it, work on it, see if you can integrate this dial into your body. And understanding that what somebody on the first day with a drill set, their 50% might be 10 years from now, as their body continues to integrate, as they continue to develop the frame and the power within that methodology, their 50% 10 years down the road might be somebody else's 100%. So for a safety aspect, as well as a good proper training aspect, how do you deal with force and pressure in your teaching methodologies and how you train? Russ, would you start us off with that one?
Sure. Yeah. My first good exposure to Chinese martial arts, I had a teacher who used the word play, which pissed off all my karate people when I use that word. They're like, you've lost the plot here, man. Play was so helpful. And what he said was the teacher puts the art in your hands. And so there's an element of the tactile nature of the art that at some point the teacher has to give you. So the teacher is, in my opinion, the first example. And then what the teacher has to do is create the culture of being a good partner as a student. So, you are loaning your body to another person to do something that is potentially dangerous to you both. Let's take that very serious. And we're going to, you're the feeder right now. The other person's learning the skill. We're super clear about who's working the skill and who is the feeder, because rarely can you find drills that work the same on both sides at the same time and don't have a lot of downsides. So we basically coach every feeder to be a good coach or participant in the moment. We ensure that there's dialogue. Hey, what I want to hear is you guys talking. Hey, what I expect to hear is you saying, hey, you're a little off target. Hey, you're not in range. Hey, slow it down a little bit. Hey, speed it up a little bit. I think I got it, right? We're always looking for something like an 80% success rate. If you're way higher than that, then we're not going fast enough or hard enough, things like that. Basically just, I guess all I can throw out there is we take it very seriously that we're not competing. We're loaning ourselves to each other, and we're building mini instantaneous coaches for a specific drill. And then we're progressing that drill. And then to Coach Kevin's point, we throw that drill away. introduce a new drill that takes what you knew and adds a new thing. We layer it, we combine it, we link it, and then we let go of those old training methodologies. Coach Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, we use, when I'm teaching a seminar or maybe on a download, it's different from at my school. I tend to use quite a bit of pressure. I don't like the idea of getting too comfortable with a given piece of work. So we will always vary, like I said, the performer, the task, the environment, to make it uncomfortable, to make it new, to make it fresh. Absolutely on point. You have to communicate. You're training with a partner, not an opponent. Early on, it might be my job if somebody new comes in to police that a little bit more heavily and to tell them and to direct them. But ideally, we have the students learning to assert themselves, communicate, verbally de-escalate the situation, right? How are you going to, so many of these reality-based self-defense schools, pardon the pun, they pay lip service to verbal de-escalation. They talk about it and then they don't do it. They get into flame wars on the internet and they enrage people, but then we're to believe that they would verbally de-escalate in a real fight. And when you go to their environments, they say, yeah, it's really important to do verbal de-escalation. Now let's take each other's eyes out. And they just jump up. So I think learning to communicate to your partner is an important part of basic assertiveness in life. Personal development has direct self-defense applications. It's essential, has to be done. And one thing that I do a lot of is not just pressure testing per se or sparring, but simulations and scenario training. As soon as you add, insults and swears or somebody in a state of delirium, somebody pretending to be on drugs in various states of agitation, this brings a lot of pressure into a dynamic. And there need not even be physicality involved. Pressure testing doesn't mean that we're losing teeth or necessarily getting mangled physically. There's a lot at a perception level, at a cognition level. You can do push-ups till exhaustion, get up in a squat and try to solve a word puzzle. Lomachenko, the boxer, is a classic example of he'll do all these very strenuous physical activities, then he'll go and play Jenga, then he'll go back to a physical activity, then he'll try to balance balls. He's always oscillating between those sort of gross motor and fine motor skills to get his cognitive thinking recovering faster. So anything that does that requires me to get out of my own head and focus on the task, that's pressure testing. It doesn't need to be sparring. And I think that's why I've always had traditionally a lot of female students. I've had a lot of older students, is because there is a way for everybody on the planet to safely pressure test. And I just think that, too many instructors teach for their own ego and they're not concerned with looking at the student and adapting it to them. But if you're there for the student, that's going to be really, really challenging to you as a teacher, I think, and it requires more of us as teachers.
100%. That might be a great segue into asking you, Coach, to keep you on the hot seat. How does the emotional component change the hardware, if you will? What is the link there?
It's massive because we all have levels of arousal from any threat. But then we have our personal relationship, our valence to that, right? So, for example, I dislike heights. I'm not a height fan. My brother is a world-class rock climber. God knows he's taken me up a few hundred meters, and it doesn't get better. But I face it, right? I'll do things that take me out of my comfort zone to gauge, and to see where I'm at. And it's like when getting tased, you say, next time I get tased, I'm going to work on this breath technique and I'm going to try to contract this way, and then you get tased and you just fall down, right? So every time I do these certification trainings, I'll be like, yeah, I'll take the OC spray. I have a new objective. It never quite works out, but you got to put yourself out there. You got to try it out. When we get into something like emotion, we need to realize that we're not all necessarily seeing the same color. What you think is green may not be green in my brain, right? So what you think is emotional arousal may not be to me. If you love heights and I hate it, we are not having the same experience in the plane, right? I don't even like air travel, and I air travel all the time. So I have to take a little mindful minute, have my little, techniques, and I go and I overcome it. So I have an opportunity for learning, whereas somebody else on that plane with no arousal, they're just mindless. They're getting irritated about the length of the trip. They have all those other luxuries I don't have. I have to stay kind of in that zone. So we have to always look at our students and say, what is their personal relationship to this stimulus? There are people that you can't touch their neck. without them freaking out, right? It doesn't mean they necessarily survived a trauma, or perhaps they did. Perhaps they don't even know they have that trigger until they feel it. But I'm not going to be able to simply enforce a choke on you over and over and over until you get used to it. I got to be sensitive. I got to work up maybe from proximity to shoulder pressure to light touch without contraction. Otherwise, the training itself becomes a form of trauma. And this notion that I'm going to put that round peg in a square hole and I'm just going to choke you until you get used to it. A lot of my teachers did that. That's why they lost so many students. And I can't help but wonder how many people left and never rejoined anything and were crippled by that mentally. Their esteem is done. I think it was Hickson Gracie who said the worst belt to quit at is white belt, because you quit thinking you're not able to accomplish anything. You train for a month or two and then go, I can't do it. And it's learned helplessness. It reinforces despair. So I'm always looking at every class as triggers. I'm trying to say, is this guy having a hard time in life? What's going on here? Can I intervene before they quit on themselves? Even in a given exercise, there's a difference between taking a break when you need a break and authentically quitting. Sometimes people quit well before their wall, well before they've achieved their threshold, because mentally that's what they expect of themselves. So I'm always trying to, hide the poison in the sugar kind of thing and get them going a little bit deeper to taste the bitter, make them do it, go further than they think they can. Because that's very, very important. Our emotional relationship will change with exposure. And the exposure needs to be intelligent, and it needs to be catered to every single individual. It has to be. If we do not have exposure to the threat we're training for, then we have no exposure to the threat. If everybody's always attacking like that with a knife, and then somebody comes up and speed shivs me, how can I possibly expect to have a response? Right? The first Ultimate Fighting was the classic example where you had people thinking, I don't believe in the ground. I'm not going to be taken down. And then when they were, you would say, well, they're a striker. They're just going to strike from their back. But they didn't. They froze. And there's a significant amount of research done, particularly in the field of aviation. If a pilot is trained for a mishap on a plane, the more experience they have, the better they tend to do. So in one study, there were 6-month rookies versus 20-year veterans. So if they've both been trained for handling a seagull going into the engine, the 20-year veterans behave better. But if in the middle of the simulation you throw an octopus on their windshield and they weren't trained for that, they both freak out and they both respond badly. The interesting thing is the people with more experience will make an equal amount of wrong decisions simply more confidently and sooner. That's the only difference, right? So I always give the example of, the classic film where the Navy SEAL turns the corner and there's like an alien, Godzilla's there. And it's always, son of a bitch. And then that's it. They lost 1 second and they're good to go. But where's the guy wetting his pants? Where's the guy running the other way? And we know from history of warfare, when people encounter an animal they've never seen, the first time, Hannibal's taking elephants out on the field, this did not cause a little hiccup. This caused complete dysfunction. So I want to make sure we're not leaving blind areas in our training, especially when we know what some of the most likely probable things we're going to encounter, right? I know as a bouncer, for example, I was working with a guy who's really good at wrestling, and I love grappling. And his whole solution to everything is double leg takedown. He goes, there's nobody I can't get that on. I say, great, but if you've got a guy covered in feces, pants down around the ankles with a syringe in his genitals, how close to that do you want to get your head on that double leg takedown? Right? And it's the environment, it's the context that changes the technique. And I've seen people freeze just because of the presence of blood. The subject that you have to intervene on is covered in blood or vomit, and that's it. They have no solution. So we train with fake blood. We train with strobes and smoke machines and you name it, because I want to just find as many ways to challenge you as possible. My dream, and I've had it twice where a student came back from a real world encounter and said it was still easier than training. That's the goal, right? Like, I don't want you to say, oh, Kevin, why did you tell me this pinky lock would get me out of this, and then it fails. I want them to go in and say, yeah, I have an answer for this. This is familiar, at least to me. That's the goal. So I think for pressure testing as a guideline or emotional arousal, just look at your students and make sure you're getting some. You're getting some level of arousal, that you're not just doing, for example, your kata the same way every day, because then it just becomes mental masturbation. It's not challenging you. There are days I might do kata for an hour because I'm working on going kind of internal and I need that meditation. There are other days I can do 90 seconds of kata and have nothing left in the tank. I can put all of my emotion into it because that's what I need that day. I need to see what I can put on the table. So emotion, and then this is how you teach the student to invest their own emotion, and to put intention without necessarily tension, just desire, have a goal. There should be a purpose to everything that we're doing.
Awesome. Wow. Awesome. Sifu Russ, I'm going to pick on you just for a little bit. I like to listen to a lot of your talks and discussions that you do online, live, and a lot of your other podcasts that you've been on, as well as Sifu Mark Wiley, the Transformations podcast. He's doing great things over there. And something I'm going to talk about one of your soapboxes that I've heard recently, and I love the soapbox. It's one of my favorites. You mention a lot about distance, and you find that maybe in the not only classical karate, but maybe even in a lot of the Southern styles of Chinese martial arts, that they just aren't in the proper distance. I believe you even mentioned it with, was it you or Coach, might have been Coach Kevin, talking about a gentleman that was doing a sword art.
Yep.
That was you.
I mentioned it. Sure.
Yeah. Would you mention that again? And yeah. What is your feelings about maybe, getting the wrong idea of being in the wrong range?
Yeah. It's something that shows up in so many traditional arts because people are trying to isolate certain aspects for safety and other reasons. But so what I saw was this video by Otaki Sensei of Tenshin Shoden Kotori Shinto-ryu. And it was a beautiful video because what he demonstrated was this very dynamic, amazing boken against boken set. So they're practicing their sword art, super dynamic, scary and beautiful to watch, a real work of art. And then he said, okay, but here's what it really means. And he showed them come in about 8 inches and do the entire set, and every target was different. At a different range, they used a different aspect of the tool, and they targeted a different portion of the body. And it was a really wonderful rubric for how you can hide things in plain sight, but also train in a very fast and dynamic manner. Of course, in those things, you get a lot of distance training. Even if you're at the wrong distance, you know what your distance is over time. You can build up the speed and dynamicism, so you can put on great demos at the Embu, at the end, at the fall festival. So those are fun. But it's a good reminder that when you're playing or training or applying out of range, your tool use is considerably different and your target availability is considerably different. So these are just very simple solutions to some massive problems in traditional styles in my mind. So yeah, it's become a bit of a soapbox, partially because it's super easy to identify, it's super easy to correct, and very few people are willing to do it.
Coach, how do you deal with range? It might be a little more fluid and dynamic, but how do you work with range, and what are some of the tools that you do for range?
To Sifu Russ's point, I think this, a lot of times people will talk about grappling arts and they'll say one of the reasons they fare so well is because the way they train is the way they fight, right? But even if you take something like boxing, there are people that most of the time in boxing, you're not sparring. You can't endure it, right? So most of the time you're training on your bag, you're doing solo work, and it's very easy there to misassume your range. But in grappling, you can't. So that's one of the sort of built-in safety mechanisms that people overlook. In grappling, you're touching and you're interacting. Pressure changes. Knowing how to deliver weight, this is something that's a bit more subtle, but it's kind of guaranteed that you're going to have good enough range to do the moves. And I think this is one of the advantages. So I always try to reverse engineer it from grappling and say, is my clinch work like that? Is my close range striking like that? If I go to, long distance striking, do I have that? Putting people into various sizes of environments, artificially delineating walls or putting them in little padded corners. This is a super good way to mess with their range without you having to be an active participant. And second to range, I would say, is speed, particularly because I have an experience in the Russian martial arts, they're very fond of saying, if you can't do it slow, don't do it fast. Absolutely true. I can't tell you how many firearms courses we've done where you do it slow before doing it fast. But the problem is if we do too much slow, Then we start to have 5 changes in trajectories on a given hit, and we're doing 9 moves. So I always say, yes, it's true that if you can't do it slow, don't do it fast. But if it can't be done fast, don't do it slow. If it's a movement that can never be done quickly, there's no arguing that a jab is a jab, whether it's a finger jab or a boxing jab or a Wing Chun jab. But there's no room for variability. Nobody can argue that a serpentine jab is going to be faster than a straight jab. So if you're not able to do it fast, why then would we be practicing this slowly? And we see this a lot in the Russian martial arts, where people have become so lost in the joy and the comfort and the ease of slow work. And they say, well, it's not scripted, so I'm learning to adapt. Yes, but you're learning only to adapt to a threat that you're never going to be able to see, and you're never going to have that emotional relationship to it. If it was 50% faster, the range changes more quickly, emotions respond differently, your cognition can't process it, the reflex starts to override. So speed and distance are the 2 most common variables, and they are automatically triggered and manipulated when we constrain the environment, the performer, or the task. So you don't even need to think about it at some level, you know. One of my favorite drills is to just ask somebody, show me what your fastest strike is. And then we have everybody holding focus mitts, and I'll film it. Okay, now I want you, show me what your hardest strike is. It could be any strike, any hand, I don't care. And I can't tell you how many people, like 95% of the people, you cannot distinguish a difference between what they perceive as their fastest and their strongest. So why is that? Is it because they're not giving themselves permission to be fast? Are they worried to look silly? Are they not giving themselves permission to release their rage? I know a lot of people are afraid of like letting out a guttural noise or screaming. So if you can't even do that, how can you ever expect to really let out? Like, show me what your craziest strike would look like, and I'll dial it back. I will put that in, you know, that water behind a hydroelectric dam. We'll channel it. But show it to me. Show yourself what it looks like. Feel what it feels like. Because if we don't experience that in our training, if at some point I don't smack the makiwara or the punching bag a little too hard on occasion and go, yep, that was dumb, I muffed up my skin or I tweaked my wrist, and if I always restrain myself, I guarantee you, as soon as you're pressured in a real situation, you will explode, and you will, for the first time, experience what your rage is like, and you will not have any parlance, any ability to understand it, and you're not going to recover from it quickly. People that are comfortable exploring, going into those waters of rage and coming out, they rarely lose their temper under real pressure, and if they do, it's a blip and they're back in seconds. And so that's why it's important. So speed and range are everything for cognition, for processing, for reflex. It's the most important element.
I want to keep you in the hot seat there just for a second, Coach. I'm not going to name any names, but it's someone you've worked with in your past, and I'm a big fan of this gentleman's work. He has one of those SWAT team self-defense systems that everyone in the world knows this gentleman's name.
Yeah.
Everyone knows in the world knows this gentleman's name. Mm-hmm. But what I found is he hit a wall because a lot of his stuff is psychological based.
Yep.
And he revs everybody up to, this one goes up to 11.
Yep.
But what he's realized, his wall that he hit over the last decade is, I've got everybody learning how to turn it up to 11, and then I send them home.
That's right.
I had no way.
Yep.
You had these guys redlining, these women, these special forces teams redlining all the time. Yep. And I had no way for them a process to dial back down. Do you find that happening a lot? And what are your processes to help someone dial it down?
I'm someone who I suffered from PTSD for quite a long period of my life. So I'm very sensitive to that, especially, if you've ever had an excessive force charge in the line of work, if you've ever, even if you're fully justified in your response, if you go beyond what you wanted to go beyond at some level, it will affect you. I always teach there's sort of 5 tiers of responsibility. And when I'm often teaching military and law enforcement, I say, you guys are the tip of the spear. So you're the smallest percentage of the population. You have a professional obligation to do your job and to use your force responsibly. But larger than that sample of population that you belong to, I would hope There are people out there that would choose to do the right thing, that would choose not to needlessly harm. I would hope in the world there are more people that would say, yes, I would not needlessly maim or kill someone, not simply because I'm a cop or a soldier, but because morally I don't feel that's right. But then even wider than that, even the guys that are like, I don't give a damn. I'm going to do it. I don't care. What's the famous one? Rather be, judged by 12 than carried by 6 and all that kind of stuff. Kill them all, let God sort them out. I know people like this who then, despite being justified, despite doing what they believed was in line with their moral compass, they then have psychological ramifications. Because when you cross the barrier of harming, there is a cost. All these samurais did not just become monks for shits and giggles. They had a cost, and they had to remedy it, right? So that's an even broader scope. Then beyond that, even if you go, man, I'm a psychotic. I think it's David Grossman who says that roughly 2% of the world's population is classifiable as psychopathic. Ironically, in the military, roughly 2% of the population makes it to special forces. Now, he's saying it's not necessarily a correlation, but it's interesting to see that there's that commonality within every population. And I know a lot of guys that have really good emotional insulation. They're like, I'm doing this for God and country. I have no problem. And maybe they'll never have ramifications. But in society, you then have legal ramifications, which goes to an even broader sample than psychological, moral, or professional. And then finally, something I learned firsthand working overseas and certainly working the door in clubs, even if you escape the law, there is social consequence. And we rarely, in this whole cancel culture world, there are more people being canceled than that are being legislated against. And it doesn't matter if you're the most humane bouncer in the world and you bounce someone out. If you think I wronged you, if I've stolen face from you, you're coming back with your cousins and jumping on my knees until they bend backwards on the curb. And I saw this happen. I saw this happen when it wasn't even justified. So then you always have to look at how you're handling the mob and the crowd and everything else, right? So I always teach those 5 levels when I teach professionals. I'll teach you how to knock someone out in a life and death situation, but I'll also talk about putting them in a recovery situation, recovery position, calling the police, taking responsible actions. And some people are like, that's crazy, man. Somebody attacks you, you have no responsibility to them. Well, you have a responsibility to yourself, first and foremost, as an individual, to your psyche, to your humanity. I always worry when I see reality-based guys that are only teaching. You see it a lot in law enforcement. Shoot first, ask questions later. You see them, it deforms the posture. They start to become like hulking. They have certain energies when they walk. They seem to be getting in disproportionate amounts of situations that don't ever resolve in de-escalation or avoidance. As I always say, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So we're always looking at responsible force. And I think this is one of the things that's most hugely lacking in self-defense training. I think it's one of the arguments a lot of the traditional martial artists make against MMA is that they've lost the Budo, they've lost the spirit, and now they're trying to retrofit it. You see the Brazilians using Japanese terms, and they're adding animal flow instead of traditional kata, and they're adding, breath work as Hickson Gracie does it, and they're moving back towards meditation, and they're coming to the same realizations, which I think is just proof that it's necessary. There's a reason all of our warrior ancestors had spirituality, meditation, wellness, diet, physical conditioning. They're all necessary components of being balanced. And Rick Fields in his book Code of the Warrior, he said we exist to preserve an ideal above ourselves. We're like thorns on a rose. But if we sacrifice ourselves in search of that protection, what value are we? If we cannot go back into society after, what value are we? Right? And we've seen after the Vietnam War, soldiers not welcome back, ostracized for participation. And when we don't have that accountability, that acceptance, it's harder for us to accept it in ourselves. And it leads to all sorts of ramifications. There's a book by Barbara Ehrenreich, I don't know if I have it here, called Blood Rights? Blood Rituals? Blood Rights. Fantastic book. She just goes over warrior cultures, how they prepared emotionally for war, and how they were cleansed when they would come back. Whether it's the berserkers or the legionnaires washing in virgin blood or whatever. There were always periods of isolation for preparation and isolation for reintegration. And socially, it was understood. And so they had a process of transformation. Society had a process of re-entry. And this is very important that we put this in our own training, because we can't always expect society to understand what we're doing, or to know, especially if you're a law enforcement officer, you're record low popularity right now. So it's very tough on their brains and on their jobs, and it changes your decisions and it puts you in danger. So I think this is something that's overlooked. The traditional martial arts always included this, and this is one of their greatest strengths. And if you've had good teachers, good lineages, you'll have that still. But it's one of the things I would say to MMA practitioners: integrate it at your own. You know, whether you're doing Wim Hof ice bathing and Huberman breath technique, find a way, but put it back in, because if you don't have that kind of routine, you're not going to have longevity.
Well said. Yeah. Well said. Fantastic. All right, gentlemen. So I got you for a little bit more, but I know we're starting to wind this down. Another big topic that I wanted to talk about is, I both think that you're fantastic online coaches. Your material is top of the line, both of you gentlemen. How has the world of the internet changed teaching for the better or for the worse? And what are your goals as an online teacher? How do you stack that with your in-person teaching, et cetera, et cetera? And what are you offering? Sifu Russ, would you start us off on this topic?
Sure. I went into this kicking and screaming during COVID isolation, like pretty much everybody. I'm a weird kind of tech guy. I have a career in tech, and I try to minimize it in all other aspects of my life, especially including martial arts. So it was a bit of a challenge for me, but I have adopted it and embraced it. And I do believe that a lot of my teachers, for instance, I take a trip to Okinawa when I can, I go, I learn, I come back. I think if my teacher were still able to teach, he would embrace this today for those students that can't be here at my local rural location where very few people are. So I think it's a necessity to be able to preserve and promote these arts today. I think we have a problem in that everybody's attention span is so low. There's a million things. There are a lot of people cross-training. I will just say maybe more than is healthy for their schedule. It's very difficult for people. There are a lot of people sipping at all the flowers, and it's very difficult to make any progress. But that's up to the individual, and how dare I tell anybody to not cross-train when it's been so valuable to me. I find that of those 4 elements of curriculum, I can teach 3 very, very well. And again, that's like theory, strategy, tactics, morality, all the yum cha stuff. Body development, I can teach how to build your fighter's body. I can teach a lot of body coordination. What I can't do is teach skill development. We need hands-on. You need a partner. We need hands-on so I can correct some things I need to feel to help you get that next level of the technique. Too hard to correct over online. So, wow, shockingly close to a 75% solution to teach over Zoom. I have decided, for various reasons, to record every course that I teach live. There's benefits to those who come live because they get live corrections instead of being forced to do more expensive privates. It helps me fill out my curriculum by having real people on the other end and seeing why my first pass message may not have reached everybody, seeing where I need to fill in what I say and how I teach and come up with new drills on the fly. So it drastically helps me. And then it's recorded so that people who come later can pick that up. And honestly, there are a lot of people who want to come in and just learn. The people who, all of us have learned from YouTube what other people are doing. It's been wonderful. It's a next level of quality of content for some people to come in and just sip from, but never decide they want to really try out the art. Some people are different lineages of the same art. They want to learn how we do it. They might incorporate some tips and tricks. Other people are serious. They're like, this is what I always wanted to do. I want to be a part of bringing this lineage into the future. And those are the people I embrace the most and want to spend the most time with. But I think of those previous 2 groups as kind of the white belts in the dojo. They're the ones that, God love them. They may not carry the art into the future, but they're helping to support the school. they're meeting their needs. They're helping to support the school. They may never learn or certify or practice properly to become an instructor, but I appreciate them being involved, and I appreciate their help and supporting the school. So I'm very happy. It helps me develop my curriculum better so I can do a better job teaching online. There's a lot of benefit to it, and it sets me up to do the workshops either here or afar, where we can spend all of our time on skill development. They've already practiced the maneuvers. They have a sense of the strategy and tactics and the goals. It cuts down on my talking because, God, when we got partners, I hate spending my time talking. So let's get right to the skill development. So I'll stop there. We could go on for a long time. I'm curious.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Agree. I agree with everything said. I would say other things because I've been doing it for video content for 20 years now. So every once in a while, somebody will see a video from like 2004 and then one from 2025, and they'll go, "What happened?" It's like a video journal of the polar ice caps melting, you know. But I think it's very good as a teacher because I will literally watch old material and go, "Wow, I don't remember saying that," you know. So that's always interesting to see how you change. It's very important to see your mistakes. I think it's very humbling. You can't gloss it over because sometimes in our brain we don't think maybe we're as dumb or naive or whatever, you know. And I've always been very self-deprecating, and I follow that whole notion from Rumi that the first duty of the teacher is to destroy the idol the student would make of them. So I'm always trying to make myself as mortal as possible. But video work does that for you. It's amazing. It's just incredible. I was like, oh my God, that's terrible. Especially when you get into the 80s hairdos. That's amazing. I had some flock of seagulls bangs. It was good. And then I would say that the great blessing is that you just get to meet people from all over the world. Because people that are going to be exactly on the same wavelength, it's very rare. You know, I've been teaching here with the dojo for 30 years and I have a dozen or 15 guys that have been with me since the beginning, but how many thousands disappeared? But when you travel in every country, when you have 2 or 3 people like that, I find it very existentially comforting. They're like cardinal points on a map. I find it very unifying in this world of divisiveness with everybody 50-50 split and arguing over nonsense. I just like knowing that I have brothers and sisters around the world that I can talk to, and we're just thankful for each other. And when we see each other, we're always wondering if it'll be the last time. And we're always appreciative and in the moment. It's much easier to stay in the moment, I think, ironically. I'm just very, very thankful I'm not posing for scroll paintings because that would be a laborious process, you know. That's it. I think technology is great for this.
Awesome. Last but not least, by the way, thank you, gentlemen, for your time. I've absolutely loved this. I knew it was going to go good, but this has gone far better than I thought. But we have a rare moment. Would you guys have any questions over a topic for each other? So you maybe get to pick each other's brains on the spot.
I'll ask the question first.
Okay.
Coach Kevin, which of your books should I read first?
That's a great question.
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
I can talk about his books just for a second because I've got a lot of them. So I would look at maybe 3 of them. And they're all so different. Yeah. And I'm going to start with one that might surprise Coach Kevin.
Okay.
Safe School. So one of Coach Kevin's books that he put out, it's almost been 2 years now. Is that right, Coach?
I think so.
Safe School is about how a teacher deals with violence in the school systems. And Coach wound up interviewing a lot of his peers in his field. And it's something that Coach was super proud of, but I was beaming over because it shocked me. He asked all of these different professionals in the field. Not one of them came up with a physical response. It was all communication, all body language, and how to overcome that situation that way. The other one would either be, is it Dragon Warrior?
Dragon Mind.
Dragon Mind or Path of the Ronin. Coach can talk about those books. But the last one I honestly think that you should get is the one that he just published, which is
definitely on my list.
Which is the constraint-led. What is the name of that one, Coach?
Unconstrained. Constraint-led. Parts, yeah. Mm-hmm. I'll hook you up, Russ. We'll DM each other.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think my question would be, because I've done a lot of traditional Kobudo as well. So I think of all the fields, it's one of the fields that has, some of the most variety in the martial arts. I know a lot of my Okinawan teachers, the amount of specializations they have in the weapons and everything else. How do you focus yourself? Do you just let whimsy take over? Are you methodical in saying it's about time I do some OR technique? I've been neglecting it. What governs what your focus is in your training? Because I know you have a lot of systems.
My training or my teaching, to be specific?
Your training. You're thinking, you're
my training.
Pondering.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's fascinating, because I think I'm probably very unstructured in that way. I would say I have a proclivity for spending a lot of time on what I would consider kind of unnatural weapons, like two-handed weapons. Mm-hmm. So long staff, two-handed sword, all the varieties of those things. I find that to be a real challenge and enlightening for me. I'm a reductionist at heart. So for me, a stick teaches me more about everything else. I kind of follow Yu Daiyao's advice, famous Chinese general, wrote back in the 1500s. If you can learn the stick, you can learn any long weapon. For me, the lack of capabilities of the weapons requires me to learn more and study more and apply better timing and range and targeting and understanding of biomechanics and physics and anything else. So I constantly find myself using tools that have specialties and then reducing back to the simplest methods possible. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that that's really answering your question, but it is certainly where my head is nowadays. So I hope that helps in some way.
Yeah, I found this to be a commonality with high-level instructors, is that there's a point maybe in their early to mid-years where they're methodical about what they do, and then after it's just kind of, I don't even know what I do. It's whatever kind of seems interesting, or you either say, I'm lacking this, and I have to work on it.
Not that I feel this all the time, but I think at some point in your journey, you should be able to do what you do in your workshops, which is meet everyone where they're at, figure out a way to help. And that might be how to train, how to study, words to use to describe what you're doing and how or why, or a simple management of range or timing or things of that nature. And really that crosses all boundaries. The tool is just an extension of the body and the mind. They all have specialties, but it's like a different hand shape. It's just, what is the right tool for the circumstance? Every weapon was created in an arms race to defeat another weapon or shield or armor. And I think, that context is really useful until it's not. And then you extrapolate and simplify.
Yeah. Excellent. Very nice.
That was that was pretty awesome. Owen, did you have any questions for these gentlemen?
I do.
Awesome.
I guess I really only have one question, but it might be kind of a big question.
Okay.
And this is for both of you, independently or however it goes.
So one question, 8 parts. Is that what I heard?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Could be. Or it could be one question with just one big part.
All right.
But what I'm interested in is, how do you approach teaching your teachers? So in terms maybe of your methodology or your system, and I know time in is always a big factor, but are there certain things you look for, or are there certain ideas or methodologies that you use to approach that? I've just wondered if any of you had an idea around that.
Yeah. Russ, do you want to go first, or?
Would you please?
So first thing I look for is good people. I always tell all of my instructors, just be honest vessels. Be honest about what you know and what you don't know. And to me, there's, I'm very scientific, and a system should be disprovable. It's not about proving what you can do. It's about disproving it and saying, am I sure this works? So I should always be going forward with that kind of Socratic approach. And to that end, everybody has to be welcome. I always say that it's one of the saddest things for me that martial arts is the thing I love the most, but it attracts some of the people I like the least, which is bullies. I got into it because I was bullied and attacked, and the last thing I will tolerate is a dojo of mine to be an environment that promotes bullying. I do not believe in the idea of hazing. I think we can all train as brothers and sisters and push each other crazy hard if we want to, safely and respectfully. Military units, have started to see the diminishing returns of hazing and their own practices. I don't like it in the dojo. I don't like belt exams with butt slapping with belts. I don't like any of these kind of defamatory rituals. To me, just respect one another, welcome everyone. And if it's a challenge to you because you're not familiar with a particular segment of the population, learn. Just open the door and learn, man. We're here to protect all of society, to give back to all of society, and all of society should be welcome. And that's the most important thing. The physical capacity or the ability to, kick ass or whatever else, this is the last thing on my mind. If people are honest seekers, they will continue to grow in the right direction.
Well said.
That's great. Thank you, Coach Kevin. I'm really glad you started with that. You gave me some things to think about. I would say I am certainly trying to weed out those bullies as early as possible. We have uninvited a good handful of people over the years from workshops and activities just because, they were not conducive to the harmony that we're looking for in the school. And definitely weeding that out before they get to the instructor level is so critical, as you said. I want people who respect the idea that there's a whole level of training and skills that they need to look for and learn if they want to become an instructor. I have a whole series of tips and tricks that I've compiled to give to them. But ultimately, I think, Coach Kevin, to your point, they need to find their way. Their teaching will be their way. Their school will be their way. Their school culture will be their way. And I have to be able to let go of my ego in that process and make sure that they become the teacher that they want to and need to be. Again, I have tips and tricks that I hope will help them along the way and do it faster than it took me to figure these things out the hard way. But I really want to save people from doing things the hard way as much as I can, as much as they're interested and willing. And sometimes doing the hard way is the only way. But so we have to figure out where that balance is. But it would be my thought.
Cool. Yeah, awesome. I lied. I've got one more. This one's pretty easy. So here we go. And then we'll wrap it up. And again, gentlemen, thank you for your time. This has been an absolute blast. I got to do the warriorship conversing question with both of you gentlemen, and it's led me to this question. The original warriorship conversing question was, and I think you both answered it beautifully on our show when I did solo with Coach Kevin, and then Owen and I talking to Sifu Russ, and the original question was, can modern martial arts learn something from the past? Can the modern warrior, learn something from the warriors of the past? So my question would be, how do you look at and approach the word tradition or traditional? Is that outdated, or do you have your own definition of what tradition is? Because Coach Kevin, as I've mentioned to you, you have your own methodology, but it's harvested, because we did this 2 Octobers ago, so I use the zombie reference. You've harvested and put the bone structure on previous classical systems, but you've come up with integrated fighting method. And Coach Russ, you still have many traditional systems that you're keeping the hardware, but you've updated the software. So what do you guys think of the word tradition, and is it still relevant, or do you have your own kind of terminology that you use, your own thoughts on what that word is for yourself? Coach, would you start us?
Sure. There's a quote that I'm very fond of. I've used in multiple books. It's a maxim from Shintoism, and it says, for something to be sacred, it must be simple enough to be done every day, and then it must be done every day. So whether we're talking about religion or spiritual practices or any cultural tradition, to me, tradition is connection to the past. That's it. And there are many times negative connotations that tradition is outdated. We take a very Bruce Lee view that's antiquated. But as Sifu Russ said, it was, every weapon was an arms race. Every tactic was an arms race. Every style was an arms race. Even in BJJ now, which is arguably one of the most modern arts out there, we see tactic after tactic after tactic being developed to counter the counter and rename. And it's becoming its own sport of mutation, quite divorced from the street. So I think anything that connects us to for me, when I train, even to this day, I still maintain the jiu-jitsu practice of bowing to my belt twice. Once to all of the ancestors who have died to bring me the knowledge, and a second time either to the training space or the students around me. And in our school, we don't line up, we circle. Everyone's on equal footing. And so we bow once to remember what brought us here, how many people have died, how many, even before combat styles, how many ancestors just got eaten by a big cat, for the knowledge to be passed down. I'm so grateful for that opportunity. And if one person plans their day to come out and train with you, that's staggeringly humbling, and I never want that to be lost. And so the second is always to connect to them. And I think just having some kind of a tradition is remembering where you're coming from, including with your own students. Many of them have been with me for 2 decades, so we have our own tradition. It's always evolving. Evolution is a process. It's not a destination. But it's important to have roots. It is, because otherwise you're prone to just, and it's not to disparage BJJ, but we see them in their modernity now going back and retrofitting things that were already there in traditional styles. Early judo was quite different from what it is today. It was much closer to classical jiu-jitsu. So I think it's always a balancing act. What does neuroscience tell us about how we're doing it, and what value is the tradition? We're always trying, but you want to be careful not to throw out the entire product, right? So I think tradition is immensely important for our connectiveness and for our purpose.
Beautiful. Thank you, Coach.
Yeah.
Sifu Russ.
I'm hardly going to stray from what Coach Kevin just said. I'll use some different words, but I will say, I hope to become the guy that at some point never expresses a personal opinion, but has a proper library of quotes of smarter people that I can draw from. And one of them that I use is Gustav Mahler's concept about we're not here to tend the ashes, we're to carry the flame. Mm-hmm. So the goal is not to create museum pieces that we never change or modify. The reality is the tradition, if you look deeply enough, has always been a tradition of change. It's only through misinterpretation and misunderstanding do we believe these traditions are as old and codified as we believe they are. So facing these things rationally, the reality is traditions change through every hand they're put in. And so at some point you have to learn just how to manage change and discuss that. And we're all going to do that slightly differently. So, Coach Kevin, I appreciate that you said you guys line up in a circle. We do that practically every class. I just had a gathering where we brought some people in for the weekend and we did an old traditional style bow to the ancestors, bow to the teacher, bow to each other. And again, that, you said it differently, but it's just appreciate the people who came before us, appreciate the current moment that we're in, and appreciate that we're trying to pass these things on to future generations. So it's just the past, the present, and the future. And so if we all remember that, then we don't elevate anybody inappropriately. My teachers weren't gods. They made mistakes. They changed things. They misunderstood and forgot things themselves. So I think just being rational about all that and not being too kooky or cult-like or over relying on the idea of traditions. We have a tradition. We eat spaghetti on Saturday nights after we've been training all day, and we drink as much whiskey as anybody's willing to drink. It's just a tradition for our workshops. But it
happens to be a perfect formula, but
it seems to be perfect. It's carbs, it's wonderful, it's comfort food. But traditions are what you make of them, and they should change and move forward and adapt. Coach Kevin, you said adaptability is the primary goal. 100% agree. It's the only way humans have survived this long. It's the only way we'll have a chance at surviving into the future. And if we want these things to be carried on in any semblance of the name or the likeness or the wisdom that's been passed down, then we need to adapt it to current times. My book is just about reframing old ideas with new, simple terminology and making old ideas accessible and simple. And I think we have to keep doing that in every generation.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time. This has been absolutely amazing. Maybe we'll get a wild hair, and in a year from now, maybe we might have some other topics that we want to cover, discuss, whether it be different teaching methodologies. It seems like ecological learning is the new kid on the block. I'm a big fan of the AI model, machine learning, which are different. But one of them is an older version of just fractal learning. So maybe we can look into specific methods of teaching and how that integrates into curriculum planning. I didn't get to talk today, but again, I want to respect your times. 2 hours is plenty. But I wanted to talk. Coach Kevin and you and I talked in private. This might be another great discussion piece. Instead of revamping a whole damn curriculum, why don't you start in a small area?
Yeah.
Work on that small area, whether it be a drill, whether it be tactics, whether it be entry methods, crossing the distance, whatever it may be. Really put some time into that, present it, see what works, see what doesn't work, and then see how that permeates into the other teaching that you do. So I think that would be a great discussion down the road. But again, I really wanted to get you guys together. I really want to thank you both for your time. This has far exceeded what I was hoping for. Owen, did you have any last thoughts?
Nope. I just wanted to say thank you very much. It's been fantastic.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep.
Gentlemen, I wish you a great day, and hopefully I'll figure out what East Coast time is sooner than later.
Take care. Nice to meet you, Coach
Have a good one.
Have a blessed one, guys.
Yep. Bye-bye.